Welcome to Lead Well, Live Whole. I'm your host, Michael Sermon. Every episode, we'll spend a few minutes exploring the challenges, questions, and realities of everyday life, because success means little if you lose yourself in the process. So take a breath, settle in, and let's spend a few minutes exploring life together. Understood courage our entire life, right? What if being afraid doesn't mean you lack courage, but fear is actually the reason courage is needed in the first place? Welcome back to Lead Well, Live Whole. I'm Michael Sermon. I've been thinking quite a bit about courage lately, and like a lot of the things I end up talking about on this podcast, the thought didn't come from a leadership book or something I heard at a conference. It started with a pretty ordinary conversation that Tammy and I had with two of our grandchildren. Our granddaughter is 12 years old, and she's in chorus. Recently, she was nominated by her chorus group to stand up and speak in front of her high school class, and with her about it afterwards, telling her how proud we were of her. And somewhere in the conversation, we mentioned the courage that it must have taken for a 12-year-old to stand up in front of all those high school students and speak. She kind of laughed it off and said, "Not really, because I was so scared." And that caught our attention because we realized what she was saying. In her mind, the fact that she was afraid somehow meant she hadn't been courageous. And if she had been courageous, she wouldn't have been scared. Her 10-year-old brother was there with us, so what started as a conversation about something she had done turned into one of those little life conversations you hope your grandchildren can remember. Tammy and I talked to both of them about the fact that courage isn't really about the absence of fear. Courage is about what you do when the fear is there. It's moving forward, speaking up, taking a stand, or simply doing what you know needs to be done, even though there's something inside you saying, "I am so scared, I don't know if I can do this." And the more I've thought about that conversation, the more I've realized it's probably not just something a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old needs to understand. I'm not sure a lot of us adults have ever completely figured it out either. When somebody says the word courage, most of us probably don't picture a 12-year-old girl standing in front of a bunch of high school students. We picture something much bigger. Maybe it's Captain America standing with his shield all shattered, beaten up and outnumbered, but ready to get back up one more time. Maybe it's a Medal of Honor recipient, and you hear the story of what that person did and wonder how any human being could possibly find the courage to do that. Maybe it's a firefighter running into a burning building while everyone else is trying to get out. And those are certainly examples of courage, and I don't want to diminish them in any way. Right? There are people who have demonstrated a level of courage that's almost difficult for the rest of us to comprehend. But I wonder if those extraordinary examples have unintentionally caused us to develop a definition of courage that's so heroic that we miss it when it shows up in ordinary life. I wonder if that's why our granddaughter didn't recognize what she had done as courageous. There was no danger involved and nobody's life was at risk. She simply stood in front of a group of people and spoke. And compared to some of the things we associate with courage, that seems pretty small. But to a 12-year-old girl who was scared to stand in front of those high school students, it wasn't small at all. And I think that's something that we forget as adults. We have a tendency to judge courage by the size of the event rather than by what it's required from the person who faced it. Think about a young child walking into a new school for the first time. To you and me, it's a school. Right? We've walked through hundreds or thousands of doors in our lifetime, but to that child, there's a whole world of uncertainty waiting on the inside. Where am I going to sit? Who am I going to talk to? Will anybody like me? Am I going to fit in? Right? They're carrying all of that through the door with them, yet they walk through it anyway. That's not so different from what happens to us as adults. Right? Maybe you're walking into a new job after spending 20 or 25 years somewhere. Everybody congratulates you because it's a great opportunity. And maybe it is. But that doesn't mean there isn't a little voice somewhere inside asking whether you've made the right choice. You're learning new people, new expectations, a new culture, maybe an entirely different way of doing things. You can be excited about the opportunity and scared of it at the same time. That's where I think we sometimes confuse confidence with courage. We look at someone who's confident and assume they aren't afraid. We see them walk into a room, take the position, give the presentation, or make the decision. And because we only see what's happening on the outside, we assume what's happening on the inside must match. But we don't know what happened before they walked through the door. We don't know whether they sat in their car for 5 minutes gathering themselves. We don't know whether they were awake at 2 o'clock in the morning wondering if they were going to be good enough. We don't know whether their heart was pounding when they stood up to speak. We see the action. We don't always see what it took to take the action. I was at a conference in Ohio, and it was a leadership conference, and it was it was high-level C-suite guys. And Jim Ziegler was leading the conference, and we were on the third or fourth day, and he stops as he opens up the session. He says, "I'm going to do something different." He said, "I'm going to violate every rule that I stand for." And he said, "Michael Sermon, I want to invite you up here and speak to us about what's important to you." Now, I got up. I made my way up to the podium. I spoke for however long it was. I can't tell you what I said. I can't tell you anything other than I was just glad I didn't pass out. And I got finished, and I went back to my chair, and I wasn't making eye contact with anybody. My knees were shaking so much I thought I was going to take off in flight. But when I talked to him afterwards, he didn't see any of that. He didn't see the nervous. He didn't see that. He just saw the confidence that came through. I was aware of the nerves. I was aware of the fear, and it would have been easy for me to dwell on the fear and just shut down. And that's where that I understood that confidence and courage weren't the same thing, right? Confidence says, "I believe I can do this." Courage sometimes says, "I'm really not sure I can do this, but I'm going to take the next step anyway." I think in that moment, I exercised courage, but I really was not confident when I was doing it. So when I think about courage that way, I think about a couple friends of mine. One's a Navy vet. He's just gone through bladder cancer and had to have major surgeries and going through watching the recovery period over the last 6 months as he's fighting through all of that. And, the weeks and the months that he couldn't eat because he was having some reactions to the medicines and the treatment. But yet he plowed forward one step at a time, right? Even though he didn't feel like it, he got up and he did what needed to be done. And now to watch him cancer-free, running around and living his life with a level of energy and appreciation that is completely new. It's like watching a young child learn something new when they're young. And then I have another friend that he used to work for me years ago as one of my supervisors. He's an Army vet, and he's still a relatively young man. But right now, he's battling cancer in both kidneys. And I've watched some of what he's chosen to share publicly about what he's going through, and the strength and the courage he is showing to the world is incredibly inspiring, right? There's something about his story, though, that has caused me to think even more deeply about this whole idea. Because when we see someone going through something like that, we tend to talk about how strong they are. We see their determination. We see them continuing to fight. We see the things they choose to share with the rest of us, and we say, "I don't know how he does it." But I also realize that I'm only seeing part of his journey. I don't see every private moment, and I certainly wouldn't pretend to know everything he or his family thinks or feels when nobody else is around. And I don't know all their conversations or all their concerns. Those belong to them. What I do know is that the courage I'm seeing doesn't require the absence of fear. The fact that he is facing this with strength doesn't mean there can't also be uncertainty. It doesn't mean there aren't questions. It doesn't mean there aren't moments when the reality of what he's facing weighs heavily on him or on his family. Courage and fear aren't mutually exclusive, right? Strength and concern can exist in the same person. Hope and uncertainty often occupy the same space. In fact, I think we sometimes do courageous people a disservice when we act as though their courage requires them to be fearless. We tell someone, "Oh, you're so strong." And we mean it as a compliment, right? We mean it as an encouragement. But being strong doesn't mean you have to pretend that nothing scares you. I mean, sometimes needs of the strong person. And we only see them, we see it in our families, in our jobs, in our relationships. And because they're so strong, we forget that there's also human fears and uncertainties and concerns, and they need the support as much as the one who doesn't appear as strong, right? Courageous people, strong people, they don't owe us fearlessness, right? My friend doesn't become less courageous if there's moments when when what he's facing frightens him. His family doesn't become less strong because they have concerns about what lies ahead, right? The courage is in continuing to face what's in front of them while carrying all of those very human emotions inside. And strangely enough, thinking about my friend keeps taking me back to that conversation with our granddaughter. Obviously, I'm not comparing a 12-year-old standing in front of a high school class with a man or men battling cancer, right? Those situations aren't remotely comparable. What connects them isn't the size of the seriousness of what they're facing. What connects them is something about the nature of courage itself, right? Maybe courage shouldn't be measured by the size of the event. Maybe it's better understood by what facing that event requires from the person. That also means we need to be careful about comparing our courage with somebody else's. Maybe standing in front of a group doesn't bother you. Maybe you've done it hundreds of times. That doesn't make a 12-year-old's fear of doing it any less real. Maybe changing jobs doesn't bother you because you've done it several times. But for someone who has spent 25 years with one company, walking into that new building may require quite a bit from them. We never completely know what another person is carrying when they walk through the door. I've experienced enough changes in my life to know that excitement and uncertainty occupy the same space. You can believe you're making the right decisions and still wonder if it's going to turn out. You can look forward to what's ahead and still be uncomfortable about leaving what you know behind. You can be excited about walking through a new door and still feel something in your stomach when your hand reaches for the handle. I'd love to tell you that every major decision in my life came with complete confidence and absolute certainty, but that's not true, right? There have been plenty of times when I've looked at the information I had, I considered the possibilities, and I tried to make the best decision I could and eventually reached the point where thinking about it longer wasn't going to give me any more certainty. So at some point, I had to make a decision. We had to make a decision. And in your life, at some point, you have to make a decision. You have to make the move. Interestingly, some of the things that I can do with confidence today are the things I once had to do without it. But that's how confidence gets built, right? You have the conversation you didn't want to have and discover you can have it, or that you can handle it. You stand in front of the room and you speak even though your heart is pounding. You accept responsibility you're not completely sure you're ready for. You walk through the door, make the decision or take the chance, and afterwards you have something you didn't have before. You have the evidence that you've done it, and that builds confidence that you can do it again. Right? That's one of the things I hope our granddaughter gained from her experience, that the next time she's asked to stand in front of a group, she may still be nervous, because I don't think the goal is for her to never feel nervous again. But she'll know she's been there before. She'll know being scared didn't stop her the last time, and it doesn't have to stop her this time either. And there's an important leadership lesson in all of this, because leadership has a way of exposing the difference between confidence and actually having courage. When people begin looking to you for direction, it's very easy to believe you're supposed to have all the answers. You're the leader, so you're supposed to know where we're going, make the decision, and project enough confidence that everybody else feels confident too. And sometimes leadership does require that kind of steadiness. But there are plenty of moments when you simply don't have all the information you wish you had, but you still have to make a decision. There are conversations you know that you need to have, even though you'd much rather avoid them. There are decisions that you know won't be popular. And there are times when doing what you believe is right, it's going to cost you something. Then there's another kind of leadership courage that we don't talk about nearly enough, and that's the courage to admit you're wrong. I've seen leaders struggle with this, and I've certainly had moments in my own life when it wasn't easy. You make a decision, maybe even defend that decision, and then the results start coming in and you realize that you missed something. Maybe somebody on your team actually warned you about it. So now you have to make another decision. This is probably even more important. You can explain why it wasn't really your fault. You can defend the information you had at the time, or you can just quietly change direction and hope everybody forgets how strongly you felt about it. Or you can say, I got it wrong. Here's what I missed. Here's what we're going to do about it. That may not look like the kind of courage that gets written about in history books, but anyone who's been responsible for other people knows it actually does require quite a bit of courage. Yeah. The same is true when you have to stand up for someone who isn't in the room, challenge something everybody else seems willing to accept, or have a conversation that you know may change your relationship. You don't have to feel fearless to do any of those things. You simply have to decide that doing what you believe is right matters more than avoiding the discomfort. And that's really what I want my grandchildren to understand as they grow up. I don't want them believing there's something wrong with them when they're afraid, because fear is part of being human, and sometimes fear is useful. Fear can tell us to slow down and pay attention. It can keep us from doing something foolish, right? So I'm certainly not suggesting we should ignore every fear and charge ahead just to prove we're courageous. There are other times, though, when fear isn't warning us that something is wrong. It's simply reminding us that something is unfamiliar, it's uncertain, or maybe it's just very important to us. In those moments, maybe the question isn't, how do I make myself stop being afraid? Maybe the better question is, how do I believe, or what do I believe I should be doing, even though I'm afraid? And I like that question because it doesn't require us to become fearless before we can move. We don't have to wait until the fear disappears or confidence suddenly arrives. We can acknowledge the uncertainty and still decide what the next step is. And sometimes that next step can look incredibly ordinary, because there are seasons when life just gets hard, right? People we love die, relationships change, jobs disappear. Plans we've spent years building don't work out the way we expected, or we get news we weren't prepared for. Maybe a door closes that we were certain was going to open. Those are the days when we're not trying to accomplish a great thing. We're just trying to deal with what life has put in front of you. We're just trying to find the strength to get out of bed and take the next step. I'm not trying to sit in a therapist chair here, because there are complicated things that we go through. And there are times when we need help from people who know how to help us work through them. I'm talking about something much simpler. Sometimes facing the day itself requires something from us. We get up, we make the coffee, we go to work. We take care of the people who depend on us. Maybe you make the phone call you've been putting off, or walk into another appointment. Maybe you sit down for a difficult conversation, or simply deal with the next thing that needs to be dealt with. From the outside, none of it looks particularly heroic. Nobody applauds. Nobody gives you a medal, and most people probably don't even know there's a battle taking place inside you. But that doesn't mean courage wasn't there. We've probably all heard someone who's gone through something incredibly difficult say, I wasn't brave, I just did what I had to do. I understand what they mean. They didn't set out to demonstrate courage. They didn't choose the circumstances. Life put something in front of them, and they simply dealt with it. But maybe we overlook something when we say that. You may have done what you had to do, but you still did it. You still showed up. You still walked through the door. You still made the call, took care of your family. You faced the appointment, or sometimes you just tried again. Maybe you were scared the whole time. Maybe you had questions you never shared with anybody, and maybe you didn't feel strong at all, but you continued to move forward. That's part of what I've seen in my friends as they've shared their battles with cancer. I see courage. But I don't see courage because I assume they're not afraid. I see courage because they're continuing to face what's in front of them. And if fear and concern are part of that journey, and again, I won't pretend to speak for them, I don't think the presence of those two things would diminish their strength at all. They would simply remind us that courageous people are still human. And maybe we need to give ourselves that same permission. We can be strong and still have questions. We can believe we're doing the right thing and still be nervous about what happens next. We can have hope while acknowledging uncertainty. We can be courageous and afraid at the same moment. Granddaughter hadn't quite understood when she told us what she had done wasn't courageous because she was scared. Tammy and I were looking at the exact same experience she was, but we saw something different. She saw the fear. We saw that she did it in spite of it. And maybe that's something that all of us could get better at seeing, right? Both in ourselves and in people around us. I hope our grandchildren remember that conversation, because they're going to have plenty of opportunities to practice courage as they grow up. They're going to walk into rooms where they don't know anybody. They're going to fail at things. They're going to get hurt. They'll eventually face decisions where there isn't an easy or obvious answer. And there may be times when standing up for what they believe, right, is going to cost them something. I don't want them believing that they have to wait until they're fearless before they move forward. I want them to understand that fear doesn't get the final vote. And, maybe there's something sitting in front of you right now that you've been approaching the same way. Maybe there's a conversation you need to have, the opportunity you're considering, a decision you need to make, or something you need to try again. Maybe you've been telling yourself you'll do it when you're more confident, when you're less nervous, or when you're finally certain everything is going to work out. The problem is that life doesn't give us any of that certainty, or at least not very often. Sometimes you have to make the decision before you know how it's going to turn out. Sometimes you have to walk through the door before you know exactly what's waiting on the other side. Sometimes you have to speak even though your voice isn't quite as steady as you'd like it to be. So maybe the question isn't whether you're afraid. Maybe the better question is what you're going to allow that fear to decide for you. I keep coming back to these people as I thought about all of this, right? 2 friends are veterans facing battles with cancer. One in both kidneys, the other in the bladder, and showing people around them what strength can look like in circumstances they never asked for. The other is a 12-year-old girl who stood in front of a bunch of high school students and spoke even though she was afraid. Those are 3 very different circumstances. And I'm not comparing the battles. I'm simply recognizing something I see in all of them. Courage doesn't look like we expect it to look. And it certainly doesn't require us to stop being human. Sometimes courage is dramatic. Sometimes it's so ordinary that the person demonstrating it doesn't even recognize it in themselves. It can happen in a hospital, a boardroom, a classroom, a new school, a new job, in your living room. It can happen when somebody stands in front of hundreds of people, and it can happen when nobody else is watching at all. Maybe courage was never really about becoming fearless. Maybe it's about recognizing the fear, understanding that it's real, and deciding that it doesn't automatically get to determine what happens next or veto our decisions. Our granddaughter thought being scared meant she wasn't courageous. I think being scared was exactly why she was. And maybe there are things you face in your own life where you've been making the same mistake, right? You've remembered how afraid you were, but you've forgotten that you walked through that door anyway. And don't overlook that. I'm Michael Sermon, and this is Lead Well, Live Whole. So until next time, lead well, live whole. Hang around the new song called Going Anyway by Red Dirt Kisses.
She was 12 years old, standing by the door. Said, I don't know if I can do this anymore. A room full of faces, older than her years. She could feel her hands shaking, trying to hide the fear. But later on she told me I wasn't brave that day. I was scared to death standing up that way. I smiled and said, honey, I think you've got it wrong. Being scared don't mean you weren't strong. Courage ain't a heart that never shakes. It ain't knowing every step you ought to take. Sometimes it's one more step down an uncertain road with a worried mind and a heavy load. It's walking through the door when you'd rather walk away. It's finding enough strength to face another day. You don't have to be fearless. You don't have to be okay. Sometimes courage is being scared and going anyway. There's a man sitting quiet in a doctor's room. His wife holds his hand when they give him the news. There's 1,000 questions nobody can answer, and one word hanging in the air like thunder. Tomorrow morning he'll get up again, put his boots on and face whatever's waiting for him. Folks will tell him, man, I don't know how you stay so strong, but strength don't mean the fear is gone. Courage ain't a heart that never shakes. It ain't knowing every step you ought to take. Sometimes it's one more step down an uncertain road with a worried mind and a heavy load. It's walking through the door when you'd rather walk away. It's finding enough strength to face another day. You don't have to be fearless, you don't have to be okay. Sometimes courage is being scared and going anyway. Yeah, maybe it's a mother holding everything together. Maybe it's a goodbye you thought would last forever. Maybe it's saying I was wrong when pride says don't, or standing for what's right when everybody else won't. Maybe nobody sees the battle that you're in, they just see you show up and do it all again. No medals, no headlines, no crowd calling your name, but that don't make it any less brave. Fear can ride beside you, it just don't get to drive. You can have 1,000 questions and still choose to live your life. You can tremble, you can cry, you can wonder if you're strong. Sometimes brave is nothing more than deciding to keep moving on. 'Cause courage ain't a heart that never shakes. It ain't knowing how the story's gonna change. Sometimes it's one more step down an uncertain road, holding on to hope with a heavy load. It's walking through the door when you'd rather walk away. It's getting back up to face another day. You don't have to be fearless, you don't have to be okay. Sometimes courage is being scared and going anyway. She said I was scared. I said that's what made you brave. You felt the fear and went anyway.
If today's conversation raised a question you've been wrestling with, I'd love to help. I offer one-on-one coaching for individuals navigating pressure, transition, and important decisions. You can learn more at michaelsermon.com.